start recording the session, and maybe you can start, right? So this online conference, it's organized by Instituto Mundo Antigo, or Ancient World Institute. I don't know how to put it in English, but I invented it right now. and Grupo de Estudos do Mundo Antigo, the Ancient World Study Group, a member of the Center for Research in History at the Pontifical Catholic University of Goiás, Brazil. So we are two Brazilian institutions organizing this activity. I'm Felix Giacomi. I'm postdoctoral researcher in classical studies at the University of São Paulo, and founder and organizer of the Instituto Mundo Antigo, which is an online Lusophone independent center for the study of ancient world. Well, in this online center, we create texts on our blog and organize short online courses from 8 to 12 hours every month on topics related to antiquity. These courses until now are in Portuguese, but in the future, we would like to extend our presence by having courses also in English. And also, this is our first international activity in English, so it's I'm very excited. We are very excited also because of that, and it's a great honor to start this international movement, welcoming Professor Richard Seaford. So before introducing Professor Richard Seaford, our special speaker today, I would like to hand it over to Professor Ivan Vieira, because he also is an organizer of this session. So Ivan, it's your turn.
Thank you, Felix. Well, I'm Professor Ivan Vieira from the Pontifical Catholic University of Goiás, and I direct his Ancient World Study Group. And it was very pleasant to be invited by Felix to this moment. And we are very glad to have Professor Richard Seaford here with us and other colleagues from abroad, I think. So we are starting this initiative by the Ancient World Institute to lecture on foreign languages other than just Brazilian Portuguese. It is a very nice start, as Felix has mentioned, and we are here to help with anything you need, and maybe translate some of the questions the students may address to the professor. And Felix, this is it. I hand it back to you so you can start introducing our guest.
Okay, before that, if you allow me on personal note, I remember meeting Professor Seaford for a lovely lunch in Exeter just before the pandemic reached all of us. Despite my poor English, as you can see, the conversation went on for 2 hours, what for me was amazing. We talked about how Eurípides' Bacchae is a misunderstood play, and the necessity of stressing the play's religious and political context in its proper place. And the Seaford, but it was actually a lovely memory that I have from these 10 days in Exeter, almost 2 years ago. It's time passed quickly, but anyway. Seaford is a leading scholar in Greek literature. He is an emeritus professor of ancient Greek at the University of Exeter. His books include commentaries on Eurípides' Cyclops and Eurípides' Bacchae, as well as the classic one, Reciprocity and the Ritual, Homer and Tragedy and the Developing City-State, Oxford, 1994, Money and Early Greek Minds, Homer, Philosophy, Tragedy, Cambridge, 2004, Dionysos Routledge, 2006, Cosmology and the Polis, Construction of Space and Time and the Tragedies of Aeschylus, Cambridge, 2012, The Origins of Philosophy in Ancient Greece and Ancient India, an Historical Comparation, Cambridge, 2019. So there are only books here, of course, because Professor Seaford has written a lot of papers and articles that I could spend all our time here just to mention them. Despite his extensive curriculum, I think the lack of translation of his books into Portuguese makes it difficult for Brazilians to know his work. This online debate, we hope, could be a turning point in this respect, with the Brazilian public getting to know Seaford ideas better. It is worth saying that I'm preparing a translation of his book, Dionysos. I think this can be published soon. Seaford has improved our understanding of some central themes, I would say. I would like to highlight 3 of these topics. Firstly, Seaford reminds us to think of Greek tragedy as much more than a literary form. In Greek tragedy, Seaford argues, the dramatization of ethnological myths has to do with the affirmation of Dionysus as the destroyer of the household, promoting violence and disruption of rituals in the tragic plots. Secondly, Seaford has been working on the impact of money on Greek culture and understudied domains such as Greek tragedy, the relationship between the abstractions of money and Greek tragedy, more particularly. Lastly, he has recently been working on the origins of philosophy in ancient Greece and India. Today, Seaford will speak on politics and mystery cult in Eurípides Bacchi. So we are very honored for the opportunity to having Professor Richard Seaford as our special guest for this unique online lecture. Professor, we deeply appreciate your taking time to share some of your knowledge with us today. Over to you, Professor. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Felix, for that splendid introduction. It's very good to see you again. It's very good to be with you and all of you, while simultaneously being in Athens, as I think you can see, only 500 meters from the place where Eurípides' Bacchi was first performed. Now, I constantly return to the Bacchi because it is one of the great spiritual works of antiquity and one of the great political works of antiquity. And the spirituality and the politics are very closely related. That is something which we in the modern world find difficult to fully understand and appreciate. Now, it seems to me that modern interpretation of the Bacchi is worse than deficient. Currently, we have a way of thinking of the Bacchi as being about irresolvable contradiction. This starts with Nietzsche, and it puts an obstacle in the way of our understanding the Bacchi. For example, the commentary by E.R. Dodds on the Bacchi, which is very influential, has almost nothing to say about politics and nothing at all to say about mystery cult. But the politics and the mystery cult are absolutely crucial to understanding the Bacchi. So the modern world simply does not understand the Bacchi. Now, many years ago, I made the realization that the Bacchi is constantly referring to and evoking mystery cult. And I have published quite a lot already on that theme, particularly my commentary on the play. But in my commentary on the play, I did not say enough about the politics of the Bacchae, and in particular, the politics of mystery cult as it is expressed in the Bacchae. So what is new about my current talk is my further exploration of the political nature of the Bacchae and the way that that emerges from the dramatization of mystery cult. The Bacchae is pervaded by mystery cult. Let us look at some examples. Now, first we have, of course, a vase painting of the god Dionysus, then a vase painting of a Maenad, a female follower of Dionysus. The chorus of the Bacchae is composed of Maenads. And then we have two extracts from the chorus of the play. Dionysus, in disguise as a priest of Dionysus, announces that he has come to Thebes, where the play is set, in order to initiate the polis. The polis must learn what it is to be uninitiated in my bacchanals. The implication is that he will initiate the polis. That means initiating the polis into his mysteries. What that means, I will tell you in a moment. But it is perfectly clear that that is what he has come to do. And it is astonishing to me that E.R. Dodds and most people who try to interpret the Bacchae seem to have no interest in mystery cult, in initiation into the mysteries. Why is that? It's partly because mystic initiation has no place in modern European consciousness or modern European society. Now, it may be that living in Brazil, you have a better appreciation of initiation into the mysteries than we do in Europe. I don't know, I'm no expert on this, but it may be that mystic initiation is more common in Brazil than it is in Europe. Now, the question then arises of the political nature of mystic initiation, and it may be that if there is initiation into groups in Brazil, it is considered to be politically backward, or politically reactionary, or politically undesirable. I don't know, I have no idea. You will have to tell me. However, what's important for understanding mystery cult in the Athenian polis of the classical period is that it is politically very significant and very positive as creating an emotional basis for democracy. And we will see that as we proceed. Now, the chorus say in the second passage on the slide,
Maybe it's too low right now.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I'll try to speak loudly and slowly so that you hear me and understand me.
I think now, the problem is the microphone. Maybe you put your hand on the microphone sometimes.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you can't hear me, please intervene and tell me that you can't hear me, and I will shout. I will speak loudly. Now, this passage here from the first song of the chorus of Maenads is about mystic initiation. Dodds in his commentary says nothing about this, but it is about mystic initiation. What, therefore, is mystic initiation? Notice that the passage says that mystic initiation involves joining the soul to the theosos, the psuche. Thea psuetai psuchan, says the Greek, joins his soul to the theosos. So this is a psychological dimension of mystic initiation. You have an individual soul, a psuche, and in the process of being initiated, into the mysteries of Dionysus, you join your soul to the PUC-GO. And we'll see that this will be of political significance. Now, a little later, Pentheus, the tyrant of Thebes, interviews the stranger, Dionysus. We know it to be Dionysus, but he is in disguise as simply a priest of Dionysus, bringing the new cult of Dionysus to Thebes. And this interview is revealing. Pentheus, from what source do you bring these initiation rites to Greece? Dionysus himself initiated me, the son of Zeus. Is there some Zeus there who begets new gods? No, but the one who yoked Semele here in marriage, the mother of Dionysus. Was it by night or face to face that he compelled you? Face to face, and he gives me mystic rites. The mystic rites, what form do they have for you? They may not be spoken for non-Bacchantes to know. What benefit do they have for the sacrifices? It is not lawful for you to hear, but it is worth knowing. Now, mystic initiation has to be secret. Why it has to be secret will emerge in a moment. But let me now just say something in very broad terms about what mystic initiation is. Mystic initiation in the ancient world is a rehearsal of death. It is a rehearsal of your death, so that when you die, you're not afraid because you have rehearsed it, you've been through it. And in mystic initiation, you go through a period of ignorance, of anxiety and suffering, and you end up in a situation of knowledge, of certainty, and of happiness. And in that process, you cease to be an isolated individual and you become a member of the group. You join your soul to the Theosos. So it is a fundamental transition from fear, anxiety, and ignorance to certainty, happiness, and knowledge. And that is something which is dramatized, staged, enacted in mystic initiation. Now, mystic initiation has to be secret. Why? Because if you know that you will not die, you will not actually die in the ritual, then you will not be terrified. But you must be terrified. You must be made to think that you are going to die, that you are in Hades, that you have been swallowed up by the darkness, and this is death, and you must be frightened. If you know it will all end with a beautiful light and a beautiful garden with music and so on, which is what happens in the ritual, if you know that, you will not be sufficiently terrified, and the ritual will not have the desired psychological effect of first terror, anxiety, the fear of death, followed by their opposites. Okay, so that is what mystic initiation is. Now, later in the play, the tyrant Pentheus he's imprisoned Dionysus in his house, in the royal house. And the chorus, who are Maenads who followed Dionysus from Asia to Thebes, are dismayed because they seem to have lost their protector. And at that moment, an earthquake and thunder and lightning occurs, the palace falls to the ground, and how this is staged, we don't know. And Dionysus appears and delivers a description of what has happened within the palace. And here it is. First of all, he is greeted by the chorus of Maenads as the greatest light for us of the joyful crying Bacchanal, how gladly I looked on you in my lonely desolation. Dionysus, finding a bull at the manger, that's where the bull feeds, where he led me and imprisoned me. Around its knees and hoofed feet he cast knots, panting out his wrath, dripping sweat from his body, biting his lips. But I sat calmly by and watched. During this time, Bacchus came and shook up the house, and on the tomb of his mother ignited fire. And he, Pentheus, when he saw it, thinking that the house was on fire, rushed this way and then that way, telling the servants to bring water. And every slave was hard at work, toiling in vain. And having abandoned this toil on the assumption that I had fled, he rushes, having seized a sword, inside the dark house. And then Bromius, as it seems to me, at least, I say in appearance, made a light in the courtyard, and he, Pentheus, charging against it, rushed and stabbed at the shining image, slaughtering me. Through exhaustion, he dropped the sword and collapsed. Now, this is very unusual behavior. It's very strange behavior. Why is he doing this? Why is he doing this? Well, it's not a question that previous commentators on the play asked. They just seem to assume that people in tragedy, in Greek tragedy, behave in a very odd way. But this is a matter of very specific details. And I still remember the moment many years ago in which I realized what the answer to the question is: why is he behaving like this? Because what we have in here is from Plutarch, quoting an earlier author. It is the most detailed account we have of the secret ritual of mystic initiation. The soul on the point of death hasn't experiences like those of being initiated into the mysteries. At first, wanderings and wearying runnings around, certain frightening journeys uncompleted in the darkness. Then before the completion, all the terrible things, terror and trembling and sweat and amazement, and then a wonderful light. There are choruses, and he is with holy and pure men and surveys the uninitiated mob being trampled by itself. Now, this is, as I say, the most detailed account we have of mystic initiation. And I have underlined in this passage those actions which also occur in the passage of the Bacchae, where they're here in this version of it, they're underlined. I remember my excitement when I realized that for the first time, this passage could be understood, because it is the dramatization of an ideological myth of mystic initiation. Ideological myth narrates details of the ritual in order to prescribe them for the future and to explain them. This is what happened originally, and that is why we do it this way. That is true generally of the ideological myth of ritual. It's true, for example, of the Homeric hymn to Demeter and a whole number of other texts. So this is very important. This is an evocation of and an ideological explanation of what happens in the mysteries. What happens in the mysteries is that in the darkness, there is a great light, a wonderful light, which signifies salvation for the mystic initiates. That is their salvation, the light in the darkness. And here in the Bacchae, Pentheus is so hostile to the mysteries that although he is given the negative experiences in the first phase of initiation, that is to say, loneliness, wanderings around, rushing this way and that, being in the darkness, and so on, sweat and effort and fear and anxiety. And then there is a light. A light is made in the courtyard. And rather than accepting it as his salvation, he attacks it with his sword. And this is truly horrible, because the audience would know that most of them have been initiated. The audience would know that this is the light of salvation, and Pentheus is attacking the light of salvation. So he's a typical initiand in the sense that he is made to undergo the mystic initiation, but he is not a typical initiand in the sense that he refuses to accept the light as the light of his salvation. What is to happen next? Well, I give you one more passage from the Bacchae. There are many, many passages I could give. I'm sorry about the misspelling, by the way. I don't know how that happened. But I give you one more passage from the Bacchae. When Pentheus is persuaded to dress as a Maenad in order to go up to the mountains to spy on the rituals of the Maenads on the mountains, and he comes out having been dressed as a Maenad in a famous scene, and almost the first thing he says is, and indeed I seem to myself to see 2 suns and a double Thebes and 7-mouthed fortress. So he sees 2 suns and 2 cities. And why? What is going on here? Again, you have to say, what does this mean? You can't simply accept it as a sort of strange thing that happens in tragedy. And Dodds here does attempt an explanation. He doesn't attempt an explanation of the earlier passage, but he does attempt an explanation of this one. And he says, well, he's drunk. Dionysus is the god of wine, and he's made Pentheus drunk, or as if he was drunk. No, he's not drunk. He is very, very self-controlled, very, very calm, very, very disciplined, and self-disciplined. Dodds thinks he's drunk because if you drink a great deal of wine, I mean, a vast amount of wine, then you may see double. But you have to drink an enormous amount of wine. You have to be very, very drunk to see double. But Pentheus is not very drunk. He's not drunk at all. What is happening here is that Pentheus is looking into a mirror. There's not the slightest doubt about this. And you will see in my commentary, I give 6 or 7 reasons for believing that Pentheus is looking into a mirror. That is how you see 2 suns and 2 cities. You see the real one and you see one in a mirror. And after I'd published that, I came across this vase painting, just looking at a book of Greek vase paintings, which is a southern Italian vase of the early 4th century BC, in which Pentheus' figure is being slaughtered by a Maenad. It's a Dionysiac theme, and he is holding up what looks like a drum, but clearly is acting as a mirror. And what's very interesting about this is that the image in the mirror seems to be of the male Pentheus, but it is a female image. I mean, it has a band on his head, as Pentheus does, and he seems to be looking at an image of himself, but it's a female image. Similarly, in the Bacchae, Pentheus is looking in a mirror, and he himself will see himself as a female in the mirror, though he doesn't explicitly say that. Now, I could say a lot more about this. I've written a whole paper about the psychological implications of it, but we must move on. But not before looking at the famous Villa of the Mysteries in Pompeii, where we have the most explicit and most beautiful visual representation of Dionysiac mystic initiation from the ancient world. And in it, you will see the famous scene in which a young satyr is looking into a bowl and seeing a mask of Silenus behind him. And I believe he's looking at the reflection of the mask. Here again, mystic initiation involves looking into a reflection and seeing something obscurely, which then, when you're fully initiated, you will see fully. And this is a very powerful idea, which has expression in the writings of St. Paul, for example, as I've also shown in an article on that subject. Now, I've said enough about mystic initiation in the Bacchae, and just about everything I've said, I've already published. You can find all the details in my commentary. But now I want to say something rather different and new about the politics of mystery cult. So I now move from the first part of my lecture, which is well known from my commentary, to saying something which I didn't say enough about in my commentary. So this is new. Now, fairly early in the play, Pentheus is confronted by Tiresias, the Theban seer, the wise man, the religious expert. And remember, Tiresias in drama is always right. And yet he is contradicted by tyrants. Pentheus here, Oedipus in the Oedipus Tyrannus, Creon in the Antigone, for example. And Tiresias urges Pentheus to accept the new cult of Dionysus, which Pentheus is rejecting. Pentheus reacts very angrily against Tiresias and says, by introducing this new god, another one to humankind, you want to examine birds and have fees from burnt offerings. He is therefore accusing Tiresias of mercenary motives, of simply wanting to make money from this new cult. There's something very similar in Sophocles' Antigone, where Creon accuses Tiresias of being influenced by money. And Tiresias there in the Antigone replies, no, it's not seers who are influenced by money, it's tyrants, meaning Creon, who are influenced by money. But I won't go into that. Instead, I look at a passage later in the Bacchae, and this is just before the passage we looked at of seeing two sons and two cities of Thebes, when Dionysus says to Pentheus, do you wish to see them, the Maenads, sitting together on the mountains? And Pentheus says, very much so, and would give an enormous weight of gold to do so. Now, this is a very striking thing for Pentheus to say. And remember, ancient Greek does not very often have the expression, oh, I would give a lot of money to do this. I mean, in English, I don't know about Portuguese, I don't know about Brazil, but in English, it's quite common to say, oh, I would give a lot of money for this. I would give a lot of money to see that. I would give a lot of money to go there, or whatever. But ancient Greek, at least in the classical period, does not have that as a common expression. So when Pentheus says, I would give a lot of gold to see the Maenads on the mountains, this is a very striking expression. It says a lot about Pentheus. Pentheus, I suggest, like other tyrants of tragedy, is a man of money. He sees the mystic celebrations of the Maenads in terms of money. He is like many people we know who evaluate their experience and indeed everything else in the world in terms of money, in terms of monetary value. This is expressed in Greece wonderfully by the myth of Midas, who turns everything into gold by his touch. So the Greeks are well aware of this pathology of seeing everything in terms of money. And Pentheus is an example of that pathology. First of all, he accuses Tiresias of being motivated by money. And secondly, he sees the mystic ritual simply or mainly in terms of money, something that is worth a lot of gold. Now, we're very familiar with this pathology, but in the 5th century BC, it is relatively new. And this concern with money is associated in a number of texts, in history, in philosophy, and in drama, with the tyrannos, the tyrant. The tyrant, a new kind of ruler in Greece in the 7th and 6th century BC, acquires autocracy by virtue of controlling the supply of money. We know that very well, for example, from the Athenian tyrants in the second half of the 6th century BC, their control of the money supply and the new invention of coinage was the basis of their power. So this is a new kind of human being. And tragedy is about what it calls tyrannoi, tyrants. It's not about heroes. There is no such thing as a tragic hero. The word hero hardly ever occurs in tragedy, and it never occurs to describe a living human being. And yet we talk constantly about the tragic hero. The tragic hero is an invention of the Renaissance. There's no such thing as a tragic hero in antiquity. What the great individuals of tragedy are called in the Bacchae and elsewhere in tragedy is tyrannos, tyrants. And the Athenians are in the 5th century extremely hostile to tyrants. That is a very important fact about tragedy, which is concealed. Tragedy is depoliticized. Is there already, particularly in Nietzsche, but tragedy is depoliticized by being imagined to be about heroes. It's not, it's about tyrants, and tyrants are hostile to the democracy. In fact, in the Bacchae, it is said of Pentheus, there is nothing more hostile to a polis than a tyrant. Here again, the messenger says in the Bacchae, I am frightened to speak free words to the tyrant, that's Pentheus, but nevertheless, it will be said, Dionysus is by nature inferior to none of the gods. So Pentheus is a typical tyrannos. He's a typical tyrannos, a tyrant, with his obsession with money, with his autocratic behavior in particular, and his way in which his actions destroy his own family. Now, we're beginning to get closer to the political significance of the Bacchae and of mystery cult. I already discussed this passage towards the beginning of the Bacchae, where mystic initiation means joining the soul to the theosos, theopseutai psucha. So when you undergo mystic initiation, you join your soul to the group into which you are initiated. Moreover, the Maenads in the Bacchae operate group, not as the Maenads, this is a description of the Maenads on the mountains delivered by the messenger, and the Maenads move, raised like birds in speed across the understretch of plains. Now, this metaphor, like birds, of Maenads getting up and moving, is a very striking one because it refers to that mysterious ability that a flock of birds has of rising up into the sky and moving together as one group. And everybody's seen that. And it's a very striking and mysterious phenomenon. How are the birds able to have complete cohesion of movement as they flock together up into the sky? And that is what the Maenads are compared to, suggesting that the Maenadic theosos moved in a mysteriously cohesive way. And all this contrasts strongly with the behavior of Pentheus. Pentheus, like other tyrannoi, other tyrants in tragedy, is impervious to the advice given to him, whether it's Oedipus in the Oedipus Tyrannus, whether it's Creon in the Antigone, whether it's Pentheus in the Bacchae, a whole number of whether it's Eteocles in 7 Against Thebes and so on. A whole number of these tyrannoi, these tyrants, will not listen to good advice. And that is why things end badly for them. And even when he sees his house collapse with an earthquake and thunder and lightning, he still does not accept the God. He still insists on rejecting and persecuting the new cult of Dionysus of Thebes. We know people like that. We know people who are impervious to discussion, even just impervious to deliberating on what is the right thing to do, who will not listen to advice. We know that kind of individualism. And that is what is expressed by Pentheus, but it's more than that because it's political. Pentheus is the tyrannos. He is the autocrat. He has the stubbornness, the self-willed obstinacy of the tyrannos, of the tyrant, in almost everything that he does. He in the end, is the only person in Thebes who rejects the cult, but he still does it. And that isolation of the individual, I will say two things about it. Firstly, it corresponds, as so much of what Pentheus does, with the first phase of mystic initiation, in which the initiant is isolated. People are in the darkness of mystic initiation. In the first phase, people are in the darkness trampling on each other. Everybody is alone. It is a struggle between individuals, with people trampling on each other in the mud and in the darkness. And then there is a bright light, and they pass into the garden where people are dancing together. There is music, there is perfect cohesion. And what I'm trying to suggest is that this is of political significance. The cohesion of the group created by mystery cult for the Athenians, in particular the Eleusinian mysteries, but also the Dionysiac mysteries, and incidentally Dionysus was important also at Eleusis. The cohesion of the group in the next world, the eschatological solidarity of the initiated group, was an important basis for the cohesion, the democratic cohesion of the polis. I've had a PhD student who's recently written in detail about this, and his book will be published fairly soon. So at the heart of the Bacantes, both mystery cult and politics. Mystery cult, in that it explains so many strange things that go on in the Bacchae. They are an evocation of the detail of mystic ritual. And politics, because mystic ritual provides a community with the cohesion it needs to survive, the emotional solidarity it needs to survive. We fight each other, but in the next world, we're all together, and we can bring that next world where we're all together into this world and live it in this world through mystic initiation. And the great conflict then at the heart of the Bacchae, which is completely missed by Dodds and all the other commentators and Nietzsche and all the rest of them, is this very simple and, for our age, completely comprehensible and pertinent conflict between hyper-individualism on the one hand and the consciousness of the community on the other hand. Now we can surely, politically, we can relate to that. And the Bacchae is this extraordinary expression of that contradiction and of the disasters brought upon us by the men of money, by the individuals who see the world in terms of money and bring disasters both on themselves and attempt to destroy the communal consciousness of their societies. So this is a simple conflict, a simple collision in the Bacchae between these two principles. And it's a conflict which we can readily understand. And the Greeks understood. It's only modern classical scholars who simply don't seem to understand it. My final passage before we enter a discussion, the discussion is the real event of the evening, because I'm very eager to hear your questions and thoughts, is a passage from a chorus. Again, the Maenads are singing this fairly late in the play. And they say, what is the wise gift? Or what is the finest gift from the gods among mortals? Is it to hold the hand powerful over the head of enemies? No, for what is fine is dear always, philona I in Greek. Happy is he who from the sea escapes the storm and finds harbor. Happy is he who has overcome sufferings. In different ways, one person outdoes another in wealth and power. Besides this, numerous people have numerous hopes. Some of them end in wealth for mortals and others depart. But the person whose life is happy from day to day, him I call blessed. Now, to a problem here, and Dodds takes this to mean the opposite of what I take it to mean. Does happiness consist in holding the hand powerful over the head of enemies? According to Dodds, the answer is yes, it does. So he takes it as an expression by the chorus of the happiness that consists in defeating your enemy. Now that is impossible for various technical reasons, linguistic and metrical, that I discuss in my commentary. And now Dodds takes this to refer to the victory of Dionysus over Pentheus. After all, Dionysus is in the process of holding his hand over Pentheus, who is his enemy. And that is a good thing. Yes, it's a good thing, but Dionysus is a god. This passage is about gifts to mortals. It's about mortal conduct. And that's one of the many reasons why Dodds' interpretation is impossible, but Dodds' interpretation, as so often with Dodds, it gives precisely the wrong meaning to the play, the opposite of what it really is. Now, this undoubtedly refers to mystic initiation. We know that because it's a form of words called a makarismos. Happy is the person who, or blessed is the person who, eudaimon hos, makar hos. There, you find it in the New Testament. It's very common in Greek literature, and it refers frequently to mystic initiation. And the image of escaping the sea and finding a harbor, that is an image which is found elsewhere for mystic initiation. So this clearly refers so much, as does so much else in the play, to mystic initiation. So what the chorus is saying here is, what is happiness? What is blessedness? Is it to defeat your enemy? No, it is not to defeat your enemy. Blessedness consists in mystic initiation because there is this competition of power and of wealth between people. And sometimes people are successful and sometimes they're not. But what mystic initiation does is to give you a happiness that lasts from one day to another. Your happiness in the here and now, not in the sense that you are about to overcome your enemies and will overcome them in the future. You will end up successful. So it's drawing a contrast between the happiness conferred by mystic initiation, the happiness of now, which is also, we know, happiness for all eternity, on the one hand, and on the other hand, the happiness that people believe wrongly arises from defeating your enemies, being successful in wealth or successful in power. So once again, this passage expresses precisely the religion of the rituals in which you overcome your own individual isolation and overcome death, which is, of course, emotionally a very powerful ritual, but the convergence of that with the solidarity of the group, which is essential for constituting the polis and which is threatened by individuals, powerful, wealthy, money-obsessed individuals, such as the tyrant Pentheus. Right, so at that point I will stop and look forward to your observations. Thank you for listening.